Direct Healing, written by Paul Ellsworth, Chapter 3, Direct Healing. What and why is sickness? Why is man, who was created in the image of God, subject to physical imperfections? Because, having separated himself in consciousness from infinite life, he has become one of a multitude of warring elements. His passions and desires are more intense than those of the animals below him in the scale of evolution, and in addition, he is subject to fear, self-condemnation, and remorse. Except for this, animal man would be as are the lower animals, with great power of resistance to disease and disingenerative processes until he had reached the downslope of his arc of growth. Then he would pass into the condition known as old age. Vitality would withdraw from his tissues, and he would pass away, probably in sleep. This applies to animal man, the highest type in the scale of physical evolution. Above him comes regenerative man, in whom the physical processes are directed and quickened by the spirit. In him appears a higher type of organism, but it is not a result of physical evolution, which is subconscious, but of direct spiritual interposition. From this, it is evident that in the manifestations of life which constitute health or sickness, we have to deal with two phases of life power. First, that which is controlled subconsciously in its work of building up or tearing down the organism. Second, that which is the direct expression of spiritual wisdom and power. Vitality is subconsciously controlled life, being a phase of your existence and expression. It is more directly influenced by your thoughts, emotions, desires, and convictions than by any other means. Before trying to formulate a direct method of healing, let us examine for a moment some of those other systems of cure which may be called indirect. We will consider all systems of drug administrations together without reference to the various schools of medicine. To begin with, does medicine ever help to bring about a cure? Apparently it does, but let us go deeper. Cure is a term which covers two distinct processes. One is quickening of vital action in the diseased parts, resulting in the rebuilding of tissue. In acute troubles, there is a tendency for this process to occur spontaneously. Colds, influenza, etc. run their course, and health returns because of the reaction of subconscious life. This spontaneous return of normal activity is usually called cure, but in reality it is only a partial cure. Unless the ultimate cause of the acute attack is found and remedied, there will be other acute attacks of one sort or another, and finally a lowering of vital tone and a settled disturbance of organic function, which is called chronic disease. Either an acute or chronic trouble may produce changes in some of the organs of the body, and organic disease will have become established. Now, what part can medicine play in all this? It can act in one or two ways. First, as a direct irritant, it may hasten the vital reaction, which results in subduing an acute attack. Second, a remedy may act chemically in the tissues and may neutralize some of the poisons which have been formed during sickness. This last phase we will dispose of first, as it is manifestly irrational. Simply to counteract or neutralize systematic poisons without reaching that disturbed function, which is throwing them into the blood, is not only useless but positively harmful. The human body is not a test tube. Why do New Thought healers and metaphysicians generally object to the use of medicine in its other phase, as a chemical stimulant to vital reaction? For a multitude of reasons, but one will suffice. The only cause of disease is abnormal thought or emotion. Back of every attack, acute or chronic, lies a false belief or an intense and wrongly directed desire or emotion. As long as these corrosive vibrations are turned into the organism, it is impossible for permanent health to exist. And on the other hand, as soon as they are reversed, the life power which originally built the body is perfectly capable of rebuilding and setting it to rights. To strive to force it to do so by the use of chemical irritants, while at the same time destructive thought is allowed to continue its work, is absurd. Natural methods of healing have come into great favor during the past 20 years. Eating, working, and breathing, these are necessary to the normal man, and like every other act, they may be performed in a right or a wrong way. In this fact lies the strength of natural methods of cure, for if the physical details can be adjusted to meet the needs of the individual, the natural tendency of subconscious life toward health and beauty will have a chance to assert itself. But here again, there is a flaw in theory and application. In spite of the most perfect regimen, the basic cause of physical imperfection may not be touched. Fear or impurity or hate or any deviation from the serene wholeness of infinite mind will tear down the organism eventually in spite of all the physical circumspection in the world. This accounts for those cases so common to all methods of physical healing, whether by the administration of drugs or by the use of natural methods, where apparently physical requirements of healing is met and disease conquers. The reason is obviously that these methods do not reach the cause of disease. I have tried to be fair in stating the shortcomings of any system of cure which is not founded on the metaphysical conception of man, on a conception of him as something infinitely greater than a physical automation. Real healing is a growth initiated and maintained by the gradual assimilation of certain basic truths. These truths may be stated something in this way. Man is a threefold or three-stratated being. That stratum of consciousness, the everyday I, which he vaguely calls myself, lies between two other strata, the subconscious below, a phase of life energy exhibiting intelligence and power, but destitute of consciousness, and the superconsciousness above, the latter merging without boundary into infinite mind. The everyday consciousness is prone to regard the vitality or subconscious life of the body as a mysterious foreign principle, permeating and manipulating the tissues and organs according to its own caprices, and to look upon the superconsciousness as a mysterious realm, also separate from the man himself, and only to be reached by prayers of humble supplication, which may or may not be granted. The body is part of the subconsciousness, the soul of the superconsciousness. Consciousness holds the key to the possible merging of these three phases of life, for the only method of growth lies through its drawing from the superconsciousness wisdom and love and power and passing these down into the body and its subconscious life. All metaphysical healers aim to do this in one way or another. They proceed, however, along two lines which at first seem contradictory. One phase of spiritual healing depends upon the statement of wholeness and the denial of evil as actually now present. There is no such thing as sin, sickness, or death, it states boldly. This seems absurd to the man suffering with chills and fever or a broken bone, but while it is not a complete statement of truth, it is far more logical than the alternative statement, I am sick. The healer stated the truth in regard to the superconsciousness. In it, there is no such thing as imperfection. The sufferer stated the truth in regard to the conscious and subconscious departments of his being. But as these are result and not cause, he has stated merely a relative truth. Dogmatic faith has cured many a serious disorder. There have been many cases in which a sufferer was able to grasp only a part of the truth, but that much sufficed. He knew that while he appeared to be sick, such a thing as sickness had no right to exist, and he met this condition by doggedly refusing to admit that his symptoms were anything but an hallucination. My first experience with spiritual healing was along this line. As the result of abnormal thinking and its subsequent abnormal living, I had developed a chronic derangement which under the best physical methods grew rapidly worse. My trouble was not one of those nervous disturbances which the doctors admit may be cured by psychological methods, but was a serious organic trouble, always treated by the most heroic use of drugs and surgery. The trouble in my case was that I didn't respond to treatment, but progressed from one serious complication to another. Within 2 months, I had reached a condition where any doctor would have been glad to have rid himself of me, for the simple reason that I seemed to be making a flying trip toward the undertakers. I woke to this fact one day and clutched desperately at the only straw floating in my tempestuous sea, a sort of prayer or statement of truth, whose logic I only dimly comprehended. This statement was, I thank thee, O my Father, that I am perfect, even as thou art perfect. I said goodbye to the doctor, dumped the medicine I had been taking into the garbage, and as far as possible went back to a normal way of living. When symptoms asserted themselves so strongly that I couldn't ignore them, I closed my eyes and repeated my formula over and over again, and in the end, dogmatic and unreasoning faith won the day. Without physical treatment, the progress of disease was stayed and I began to mend. For a long time after this, I was puzzled as to the way of using another element of spiritual healing, the direct manipulation of subconscious life in the tissues by the illumined consciousness. If the everyday mind, which I call myself, is able to receive from the higher strata of my being wisdom and power, it should be possible for me to turn this power directly into the subconsciousness and correct what was imperfect there. This would be the rational method of accomplishing that which the physical school attempted to do indirectly through drugs and manipulations and applications. If I am the life of this body and the former and renewer of its tissues, it should be possible for me to direct and correct the vital processes by the exercise of my will and attention. 2 things stood in the way. In the first place, how was it possible to recognize disease and imperfection at one moment while at the next I was claiming perfection? How could I treat ailing parts while at the same time thanking the infinite Spirit that I was at that moment all that I should be? The second difficulty lay in the application rather than in theory. I found that when I directed my attention to parts of my body which were not properly behaving themselves, the result was just the opposite of what I wanted it to be. Symptoms became instantly more menacing and troublesome. I found the answer to these contradictions, as we must eventually find all truth, by retreating to the wise silence and then working out slowly and observantly the principles which I discovered there. Gradually I came to see it was perfectly logical to say, I am whole, even though I might be laid up with a broken leg, because the master element of that personality I called I was whole. I, the superconscious I, was always serene and perfect. And by putting the emphasis on this phase of my being, I restored to it that harmonizing power which it was intended to exhibit. And I found that there was at least one sufficient reasoning for the quickening of disease or its symptoms in those parts to which I directed my attention. It was that I was still in bondage to fear, and that the healing vibrations which I directed to the tissues in question were always more or less vitiated by this admixture of fear. And fear is disintegrative and destructive. It tears down. Other destructive thoughts and emotions may act in the same way, with the attention directed to a part of the body which is negative and non-resistant because of its lowered vitality. They find a direct channel through which they may flow with disastrous results. For this reason, it has been the experience of many healers that treatment directed to localized areas of the body are more apt to do harm than good. Because of this danger, I am going to conclude this first chapter on direct healing by outlining some exercises which should be practiced before any attempt is made to direct the healing vibrations into various parts of the body. Fear, worry, anger, sensualism, these are the destructive vibrations which sometimes flow down the path of consciousness along with healing vibrations. Now, one of the peculiar things about these destructive thoughts is that you cannot fight them directly. For instance, suppose that you have been manifesting symptoms which the doctors dignify with the name rheumatism. You have grasped the fact that it is your own misuse of that life force which is a part of you which has made this condition possible. But when a twinge of pain comes, all of your newfound philosophy has a tendency to desert you, and in its place comes fear, sickening fear. And you can't kick fear out directly. You can't say, "Get out, I am not afraid." Sometimes that helps, but it will not restore the poise necessary to the perfect manipulation of vital force. As a matter of fact, this poise is not to be found in the personal will or attitude, but must be entered into by replacing personality with impersonality. You must learn to drop your concern in that physical mechanism which you have been in the habit of calling you, and must turn your attention to that other and greater phase of your being, your oneness with God. For the time, drop all thought of healing. You must restore harmony in your consciousness before you can hope to do so in your body. You might take this statement: perfect love casts out fear. Repeat it a dozen times slowly and thoughtfully. Then take another statement: I and my Father are one. As you repeat it, let your inner vision broaden, taking in the earth as you would see it from a great height. And consider that you are one with all this space and life, one with the wind and the rain, with the sun and the planets. I and my Father are one. That interior and all-perfecting life force which I am is one with the life force working in and through all things. And as this realization settles down upon you, you will find the little worries and fears slipping away. You will learn to regard from the impersonal standpoint the physical imperfections of that body which you have formed. That does not mean that you will learn to be resigned to sickness or pain. On the contrary, you will see that all imperfection is unnecessary and undesirable, but you will learn to slip off the old garment of fear. There is a wonderful healing tendency in this impersonal attitude. Imperfections of body, like those of mind, will begin to slip from you as you loosen the hold of your fear upon them. Just as error thoughts in regard to your real nature have made disease possible, so a serene contemplation of the truth will spread into your subconsciousness and will lay the foundation for the only real healing, that which results from a direct regeneration of the tissues by the life energy controlled by the illumined consciousness. Of that we will speak in another chapter. End of chapter 3 of Direct Healing by Paul Ellsworth.